They say the free market is the ultimate expression of human liberty. If that's true, then humanity has officially gone insane. We are standing at the precipice of late-stage capitalism, looking down into a digital abyss where dignity goes to die and where a grilled cheese sandwich holds more value than a used Honda Civic. This isn't just a list of transactions. It is a crime scene investigation into the collective psyche of a species that has too much credit and not enough sense. From necrotic body parts to the literal sale of human souls, this is a chronicle of the strangest bazaar in history. Prepare yourself. You are about to witness the moment commerce stopped making sense and started hallucinating. 1. The Life for Sale. Experiment. In 2008, an Australian man named Ian Usher didn't just have a midlife crisis, he monetized it. Following a catastrophic divorce that left him surrounded by memories he desperately wanted to incinerate, Usher listed his entire existence as a single package deal. This wasn't metaphorical. The listing included his house in Perth, his Mazda car, his jet ski, his job at a rug store, and even formal introductions to his bewildered friends. The auction was a radical act of self-erasure, a capitalist suicide note written in HTML. The winning bid clocked in at over $300,000, allowing Usher to walk away from his biography with nothing but his passport and a wallet full of cash. He didn't just move houses. He sold the very context of his being to a stranger who wanted a turnkey life. It remains the ultimate new game plus move in the history of human resetting. 2. The Virgin Mary Grilled Cheese. This is the patient zero of viral auctions. A Florida woman kept a decade-old grilled cheese sandwich, minus one bite, because she claimed the grease stains had formed the holy visage of the Virgin Mary. She kept this dairy-based icon in a nightstand, preserved by nothing but preservatives and faith, for 10 long years. Rather than molding into a biohazard, the sandwich hardened into a fossilized talisman. When it finally hit the auction block, it didn't sell for pocket change. An online casino paid $28,000 for the privilege of owning the Virgin Mary. That is the price of a brand new car for a piece of bread that technically qualifies as antique refuse. It proved that in the right lighting, even a neglected lunch can become a religious artifact if the internet screams loud enough. 3. The Dybbuk Box of Nightmares. Most people sell furniture because it doesn't match the rug. This seller sold a wine cabinet because it was trying to kill them. Known as the Dybbuk Box, this mahogany cabinet came with a terrifying provenance. It supposedly housed a malicious spirit from Jewish folklore capable of haunting anyone who possessed it. The seller described hair loss, phantom smells of cat urine, and terrifying nightmares of an old hag. Despite these glowing reviews of psychological torture, a bidding war ensued. A medical museum director paid $280 to bring this portal to hell into his home. It eventually inspired a Hollywood horror film, proving that we are the only species that will willingly purchase a curse if the shipping is reasonable. It sits today in a museum, a wooden box of demons that capitalism managed to put a price tag on. 4. The Infinite Forehead Billboard. In 2005, a web developer decided that his face was underutilized real estate. He auctioned off his forehead as advertising space for a period of 30 days. The concept was dystopian cyberpunk brought to life. A human walking around with a corporate logo stamped above his eyebrows like branded cattle. The winning bidder was an online casino, paying a staggering $37,000. For a month, this man walked the earth with a temporary tattoo promoting gambling, turning every social interaction into a pop-up ad. It was a grotesque blending of biology and marketing, a moment where the human body ceased to be a temple and became a billboard. One has to wonder if his friends installed ad blockers in their glasses just to have a conversation with him. 5. William Shatner's Kidney Stone. Celebrity memorabilia usually consists of autographed photos or costumes. Captain Kirk, however, decided to sell his own calcified suffering. William Shatner passed a kidney stone, an experience he described as pure evil, and rather than flushing it, he retrieved the jagged little mineral and put it up for auction. The logic was undeniable. If people love the man, they must love his renal obstructions. The stone sold for $25,000. While the money went to a housing charity, making this perhaps the most noble sale of biological waste in history, the fact remains that someone owns a piece of William Shatner's internal plumbing. It raises a disturbing question about the line between fandom and fetishism. To the buyer, this wasn't just a stone. It was a meteorite from the inner space of a sci-fi legend. 6. The Laptop of Doom. There is dangerous tech, and then there is the persistence of chaos. This wasn't just a laptop. It was a digital biological weapon. A Samsung laptop was intentionally infected with 6 of the most destructive computer viruses in history, including I Love You and WannaCry, malware that caused billions of dollars in global damage. It was air-gapped and sold as a piece of high art sculpture. The final price was $1.34 million. The buyer essentially purchased a hand grenade with the pin pulled, encased in a sleek chassis. It served as a terrifying monument to our own vulnerability, a Pandora's box of code that could never be connected to Wi-Fi without risking digital Armageddon. It's the only computer in the world worth more because it is completely and utterly broken. 7. The Ghost in a Jar. A man in Arkansas found a ghost haunting his home. Instead of calling a priest, he called the market. He claimed to have trapped the spirit in a glass jar and listed it for sale, issuing a grave warning to the winner. Do not open this jar. The listing wasn't just a sales pitch. It was a horror story serialized in the item description field. The jar sold for just over $50. Think about that valuation. The seller claimed to have captured proof of the afterlife, a spectral entity that defies the laws of physics, and the market decided it was worth less than a video game. Either the buyer got the deal of the century on an eternal soul, or they paid $50 for an empty jar and the power of suggestion. 8. Justin Timberlake's Leftovers. Fame has a way of transmuting garbage into gold. Seeing an opportunity after a radio interview, a DJ swiped a slice of French toast that Justin Timberlake had partially eaten. The pop star had taken a bite and left the rest, leaving behind a syrupy artifact of the distinct 2000s boy band era. Most would see food waste. The internet saw a relic. A superfan paid $1,025 for the privilege of owning the cold, hardened remains of Timberlake's breakfast. The buyer wasn't purchasing sustenance. They were buying the DNA-adjacent glamour of a celebrity. It sits in a freezer somewhere, a piece of egg-soaked bread that costs more than a mortgage payment, preserved like a holy sacrament of pop culture. 9. The entire nation of New Zealand. In a display of geographical audacity, a citizen from Australia listed the entire country of New Zealand for sale. The starting bid was a measly 0.01 Australian dollars. The listing was a masterclass in sibling rivalry between nations, describing the country as having dodgy weather, but very nice sheep. It was a prank of sovereign proportions. Before eBay administrators could intervene to stop the unauthorized liquidation of a UN member state, the bidding reached $3,000. For a brief, shining moment, the price of a developed nation with a GDP of billions was roughly the same as a used Toyota. The sale was voided, much to the relief of the New Zealand government, which presumably didn't want to be shipped via standard mail. 10. The Amputated Leg Lamp. After surviving a plane crash that necessitated the amputation of his leg, a man in North Carolina fought to keep the severed limb. Once he gained custody of his own body part, he did the only logical thing. He taxidermied it and turned it into a lamp, echoing the prop from A Christmas Story. When he tried to sell this macabre furniture on eBay, the legalities got murky. eBay shut down the auction because selling human body parts is strictly prohibited, regardless of whether you grew them yourself. It was a bizarre intersection of property rights and bioethics. The man argued it was his leg to sell. The platform argued it was medical waste. It remains a glowing, severed testament to the fact that some DIY projects should simply never happen. 11. The Cheeto Harambe. In 2017, the internet was still mourning Harambe, the gorilla tragically killed at the Cincinnati Zoo. Nature, it seems, provided a memorial. A seller found a flamin' hot Cheeto that bore a vague Rorschach test resemblance to the primate. Rather than eating the spicy snack, they encased it and listed it as a rare collectible. The winning bid was $99,900. Let that number sink in. Someone paid nearly $100,000 for a piece of processed corn puff because it looked like a dead gorilla. It is perhaps the single most damning piece of evidence against human financial responsibility. That Cheeto is worth more than the combined annual income of most families, proving that meme culture has completely decoupled from reality. 12. Scarlett Johansson's Mucus. During an appearance on The Tonight Show, Scarlett Johansson mentioned she had a cold. The host, seeing an opportunity for charitable grossness, handed her a tissue. She blew her nose, signed the snot-filled rag, and bagged it. It was then auctioned off, with proceeds going to hunger relief. A noble cause fueled by a disgusting product. It sold for $5,300. We live in a world where a tissue containing the rhinovirus of an A-list actress is more valuable than a diamond ring. The buyer didn't just want an autograph. They wanted biological intimacy. It is a sterile, signed bag of germs that serves as a monument to the disturbing power of celebrity worship. 13. The Missile Silo Home. For the ultimate doomsday prepper, a basement isn't enough. You need Cold War infrastructure. An entire decommissioned Atlas F missile silo in upstate New York was listed and sold for $2.1 million. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress designed to withstand a nuclear direct hit, complete with launch control centers and endless concrete tunnels. The buyer acquired a property that speaks to the deepest paranoias of the modern age. It is a house built for the end of the world, a subterranean palace where you can wait out the apocalypse in comfort. It represents the ultimate architectural pivot. A structure built to destroy the world is now being used to hide from it. 14. The Haunted Crying Boy Painting. Art critics look for brushwork. These buyers looked for arson. The Crying Boy is a mass-produced print from the 1950s that carries a terrifying urban legend. Houses that contain the painting burn down, yet the painting itself is always found untouched in the ashes. It is the curse of fire, captured in the teary eyes of a kitschy portrait. Despite being widely regarded as a cursed object that invites structural fires, a copy sold on eBay. The buyer wasn't purchasing art. They were playing Russian roulette with their homeowner's insurance. It creates a fascinating philosophical loop. Is the thrill of owning a dangerous object worth the risk of waking up to the smell of smoke? 15. The Meaning of Life. In a moment of metaphysical arrogance, a user claimed to have discovered the true meaning of life and listed it for auction. The description was vague, promising enlightenment to the highest bidder. It was the sales pitch of every guru and cult leader throughout history, distilled into a buy it now button. Someone paid $3.26. The price is arguably the funniest part. The answer to the greatest philosophical question in human history was valued at less than a latte. The seller likely mailed a piece of paper that said 42 or be kind, leaving the buyer with a receipt for their own gullibility. It was a bargain bin enlightenment for a discount world. 16. The Guinea Pig Armor. Not all heroes wear capes. Some are rodents. A seller created a handcrafted scale mail suit of armor specifically fitted for a guinea pig. The craftsmanship was genuinely impressive, featuring a tiny helmet and articulated steel plates. It turned a fuzzy potato-shaped pet into a medieval warrior ready to sack a miniature castle. The armor sold for $1,150. Even better, the proceeds went to a guinea pig rescue group. It stands as a rare moment of wholesome absurdity in the dark catalog of internet commerce. Someone out there has a rodent that is better protected against sword attacks than most human beings, and honestly, that's the kind of energy the world needs. 17. The Casey Anthony Mask. In one of the darkest corners of the auction site, a latex mask described as a totem of tragedy appeared. It was a sculpt of Casey Anthony, the woman at the center of one of America's most polarizing murder trials. The seller described it as a mask of a real-life monster, intended for Halloween shock value. The item sparked a furious bidding war, eventually selling for nearly $1 million. The transaction sits at the uncomfortable intersection of true crime obsession and moral bankruptcy. The buyer paid a fortune to wear the face of a woman associated with the death of a child, proving that infamy pays just as well as fame, provided the story is grim enough. 18. The Into the Wild Bus. Bus 142 was an abandoned wreck in the Alaskan wilderness where Christopher McCandless starved to death, a story immortalized in the book and film Into the Wild. For years, it was a dangerous pilgrimage site for hikers. Eventually, it was airlifted out by the National Guard and, technically not an eBay sale but a high-profile transfer, ended up at a museum via public funding negotiations. However, before its preservation, pieces of the bus and items from the site appeared on auction sites. People were desperate to own a shard of the tragedy. It highlights our grim fascination with martyrdom. We want to touch the physical relic of someone else's fatal idealism, perhaps to safely consume the adventure without the starvation. 19. The Bottle of Thrown Elvis Water. At a concert in 1977, Elvis Presley allegedly drank from a plastic cup and tossed the remainder. A fan, possessing the reflexes of a jungle cat and the foresight of a hoarder, caught the droplets. Decades later, they listed the Elvis water for sale. It wasn't the cup. It was the few tablespoons of liquid supposedly backwashed by the king. It sold for $4.55. In religious terms, this is a second-class relic. In scientific terms, it is evaporated H2O and spit. The buyer purchased the hydrological cycle of a dead musician, hoping that the water retained the molecular memory of Jailhouse Rock. It is devotion distilled into its most liquid and ridiculous form. 20. The Adultery Redemption Points. After cheating on his girlfriend, a man was given a list of tasks to perform to earn points towards forgiveness. In a stroke of lazy genius, he outsourced his penance. He auctioned off his redemption points, allowing strangers to pay him to do the chores he needed to do to save his relationship. The winning bidder paid $51. They effectively bought stock in a stranger's failing relationship. They paid to watch a man scrub floors and write apology letters, turning a private romantic crisis into a spectator sport. It was emotional labor subcontracting, and it set a dangerous precedent for lazy partners everywhere. 21. The Jar of Farts. We have reached the nadir of dignity. A man in Nashville, perhaps gazing at a mason jar and thinking potential, decided to capture his roommate's flatulence. He sealed the jar and listed it with a description that treated the gas like a fine vintage wine. It was a joke, surely, until the bids started coming in. The price climbed to $84 before eBay intervened, citing policies against the sale of bodily fluids and gases. But for a brief moment, the market spoke, and it said that contained methane from a hipster's colon has monetary value. It is the ultimate proof that you can sell absolutely anything if you write a funny enough description. 22. The Bridgeville Liquidation. Why buy a house when you can buy a zip code? Bridgeville, California, holds the distinction of being the first town ever auctioned on eBay. The listing included the post office, a dozen cabins, and a cemetery. It was a fixer-upper on a municipal scale, offering the buyer the chance to play God with a tiny, dusty corner of the Golden State. It sold for $1.77 million. The buyer backed out, but the town was relisted and sold again famously. It represents the ultimate monopoly fantasy, owning the streets, the houses, and the literal ground beneath the residents' feet. It turns community into a commodity, stripping a town of its identity and turning it into an asset on a balance sheet. 23. The Intellectual Property of a Soul. A 20-year-old student from Washington decided that his soul was taking up too much space. He listed it for auction, promising to deliver a contract transferring ownership of his spiritual essence to the highest bidder. It was a theological gamble. If the soul doesn't exist, it's a scam. If it does, he's doomed for eternity. A woman from an outreach ministry won the bid for $400. She bought it presumably to save it, creating a transactional salvation. For the price of a mid-range laptop, this student contractually obligated his ghost to haunt a stranger in Iowa. It brings a whole new layer of bureaucracy to the afterlife. 24. The Imaginary Friend. Loneliness is a market, and this seller cornered it. A man listed his imaginary friend, John Malapaiman, for sale. The listing described John as very friendly and great with kids, noting that he had outgrown the entity. It was a conceptual art piece disguised as a classified ad, selling the nothingness of a childhood delusion. John sold for nearly $3,000. The buyer received a letter of transfer and nothing else. They paid thousands for the idea of a friend, for a narrative construct. It suggests that in a world of tangible clutter, the most expensive thing you can buy is a blank space where you can project your own comfort. 25. The broken laser pointer. This is the transaction that arguably built the empire. Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, then Auction Web, listed a broken laser pointer as a test. He was stunned when it sold for $14.83. Confused, he emailed the buyer to ensure they understood the device was garbage. The buyer replied, "I collect broken laser pointers." It was the genesis moment of the platform. It proved that for every piece of trash there is a treasure hunter with a specific, inexplicable dysfunction. It laid the foundation for the entire digital economy. One man's trash isn't just another man's treasure. It's a collector's item. 26. The grandmother's ghost cane. A seller listed a metal walking cane, claiming it belonged to his deceased grandfather, who was very much still attached to it. The description warned that the cane ghost hated rap music and would knock things over if offended. It played perfectly into the haunted object niche, offering a roommate who is both invisible and grumpy. An online casino, the patrons of so much internet stupidity, bought it for $65,000. They weren't buying a mobility aid. They were buying a story. The cane ostensibly sits in a display case now, a silent metal tube that supposedly houses the spirit of an irritable old man, monetized for having bad taste in music. 27. The Unborn Corporate Mascot. In 2005, the GoldenPalace.com casino struck again. A pregnant woman accepted $15,000 to legally name her unborn child after the website. It was a dystopian baptism. The child was born GoldenPalace.com Silverman. The mother got cash. The child got a lifetime of bullying and a name that sounds like a phishing scam. This transaction crossed a line that most people didn't know existed. It turned identity into ad space before the human even took their first breath. It is the ultimate brand loyalty, branding a human being like livestock for a 5-figure check. One hopes the kid goes by Goldie. 28. The Holy Vatican Puddle. Religion relies on faith, but this relied on sheer delusion. A seller scooped water from a rain puddle in St. Peter's Square, claiming the Pope had driven through it. Therefore, by the transitive property of tires to asphalt to water, the sludge was holy. It was blessed by proximity to a fiat. It sold for over $190. The buyer paid top dollar for dirty street water because of a tenuous connection to the pontiff's transportation. It exposes the desperation of the faithful consumer. We want the magic so badly, we will buy the mud that the magic drove over. 29. The Used Coffin. Slightly used is a term acceptable for cars, not for caskets. A Texas man listed a coffin that had been occupied by his great-grandfather for 3 years before the body was exhumed and cremated. The seller brushed off the morbidity, noting the coffin was still structural. He was essentially selling a studio apartment that had been recently vacated by a corpse. It sold for a discount price. The buyer acquired a death box with a verified occupancy history. It is the ultimate recycling initiative, proving that even in death, the market demands efficiency. Why let good wood go to waste just because it spent 1,000 days underground? 30. James Blunt's sister. This sounds like a joke, but it resulted in a marriage. Singer James Blunt listed his sister on eBay because she needed transportation to a funeral in Ireland during a transport strike. The listing was titled Damsel in Distress. It was a human trafficking listing disguised as chivalry. A man with a helicopter won the auction. He flew her to the funeral, they fell in love, and they eventually got married. Blunt essentially used an auction site as a high-stakes dating app, It is the only item on this list where the transaction resulted in new life rather than just a lighter wallet. 31. The Among Us McNugget. In 2021, the world peaked in stupidity. A McDonald's Chicken McNugget was discovered in a BTS meal that resembled the crewmate from the video game Among Us. It was a greasy, breaded pareidolia. The seller listed it, and the internet lost its collective mind. It sold for $99,997. Someone presumably traded their life savings for a nugget that will rot. It is a perishable meme, a symbol of a culture that has so much excess capital it can afford to spend a fortune on a visual pun made of mechanically separated poultry. 32. The Apple, One Computer. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak built the Apple I in a garage, creating the spark that would eventually put a smartphone in everyone's pocket. It is a piece of genuine history. One of the few functional units left appeared on eBay, a messy board of wires and wood that looks like a high school science project. It sold for $1.5 million. Unlike the Nugget, this makes sense. The buyer purchased the technological equivalent of the Gutenberg Bible. It is the Genesis block of Silicon Valley, a reminder that the world's most valuable company started with two guys soldering chips in a suburban driveway. 33. The Britney Spears. Pregnancy test. In a gross invasion of privacy, a radio station dug through the trash of a hotel where Britney Spears had stayed. They found a used pregnancy test. Rather than recoiling in horror, they bagged it and sold it. It is an object that belongs in a medical waste bin, yet it became a high-value asset. It sold for $5,000. The buyer possesses a stick that a pop star urinated on. It is the dark side of the parasocial relationship. The desire to own a celebrity is so strong that we will purchase their discarded diagnostic tools. It turns biology into a souvenir. 34. The Invisible Art. An artist listed a piece of art titled Fresh Air. The listing was for nothing. No canvas, no sculpture, just the concept of the art. It was a listing for the emperor's new clothes, sold to the emperor's new art collectors. It mocked the very idea of ownership. It sold for $10,000. The buyer received a certificate of authenticity for empty space. They paid $10,000 to be part of the joke, proving that value is entirely hallucinated. If you agree it's art, it's art. If you agree it's worth $10,000, then the air in that room just got a lot more expensive. 35. The One Direction Toothbrush. Niall Horan, of the boy band One Direction, used a toothbrush. That toothbrush was retrieved and sold. It wasn't cleaned. The bristles still contained the DNA and plaque of a teen idol. It is arguably a biohazard, but to the teenage fanbase, it was the holy grail. It sold for over $3,000. A used oral hygiene tool sold for the price of a decent vacation. It highlights the visceral, almost cannibalistic nature of fandom. The buyer wants to be close to the idol, even if that closeness involves centuries-old bacterial colonies from their gum line. 36. The Wedding Dress Revenge. A man's wife left him for another guy. In a fit of cathartic rage, he modeled her wedding dress himself and listed it on eBay. The photos showed a hairy, bearded man in white silk, looking miserable. The description was a brutal, hilarious takedown of the failed marriage and the dress's bad luck. The post went viral, and the dress sold for thousands, far more than its retail value. The buyer wasn't paying for the silk. They were paying for the narrative. They were buying a front-row seat to a man's emotional exorcism. It proves that tragedy plus comedy equals profit. 37. The Rights to Name a Human. A Connecticut woman auctioned off the right to name her baby. Unlike the Golden Palace mom, this one had rules, no obscenity. But the core concept remained. The identity of a human being was up for grabs to the highest bidder. It commodified the first gift a parent gives a child. The winning bid was $15,500. The result? The child is named. Actually, the winner was calm about it, but the precedent is terrifying. It turns the birth certificate into a billboard. In the future, we might all be named Coca-Cola Jones if the market dictates it. 38. The town of Albert, Texas. If Bridgeville was a fixer-upper, Albert, Texas was a ghost town with potential. The listing included a dance hall, a tractor shed, and a population of roughly 0. It was the purchase of a classic Western film set, waiting for a sheriff to ride in. It sold for $2.5 million. The buyer bought history, dust, and silence. Owning a town is the ultimate American flex. It says, I don't just own a home, I own the jurisdiction. It is the land baron dream, realized through a buy it now click. 39. The liver listing. A man in Florida, clearly unfamiliar with the organ procurement and transplantation network, listed his liver on eBay. The bidding skyrocketed to $5.7 million before the site admins woke up and pulled the plug. The seller was arguably trying to game the system, selling parts of himself to fund the rest of himself. It highlighted the grim reality of biological value. If legal, our organs are worth millions. We are walking gold mines of tissue kept poor by laws and ethics. The auction was a darkly comic reminder that, strictly speaking, we are all made of very expensive meat. 40. The vote. In 2008, a Minnesota student realized his Democratic voice had value. He listed his vote in the presidential election to the highest bidder. I will vote for whoever you tell me to, he promised. It was the literal selling out of democracy, a cynicism so pure it was almost refreshing. The bid hit $10,000 before the FBI and eBay shut it down. Selling a vote is a federal crime, but the auction exposed a truth. In a lobbyist-heavy world, many people feel their vote is already bought. This kid just wanted to cut out the middleman and get a check directly. 41. The time machine plans. A user listed blueprints for a time machine. They were diagrams, scribbles, and pseudo-scientific ramblings. The seller offered no working prototype, only the potential to master the fourth dimension. It was a tax on the dreamers and the desperate. It sold for roughly $20. The low price is telling. A working time machine would be worth trillions. Plans for one, $20. The buyer likely spent an afternoon taping cardboard together before realizing they were still stuck in the present. It's the IKEA effect applied to quantum physics. 42. The Cornflake Illinois. Two sisters in Virginia found a cornflake shaped like the state of Illinois. Most of us eat geography every morning without noticing, but they saw a map. They listed the brittle, toasted state online. It shouldn't have been worth the milk it was destined for. A trivia collector bought it for $1,250. That is a return on investment that would make Wall Street blush. A fraction of a cent of corn turned into $1,000. It is a testament to pareidolia, our brain's desire to find patterns, and the fact that collectors will buy anything if it's unique, even if it's destined to go stale. 43. The Hollywood land sign. The iconic Hollywood sign used to say Hollywoodland. When the sign was refurbished in the 70s, the original rotting metal letters were scrapped. Dan Bliss, a promoter, ended up with them and listed the massive, rusty HOLLY and Friends on eBay. They sold for $450,000. The buyer bought the literal symbol of American fame. It's a poetic purchase, owning the facade of the Dream Factory. It is massive, difficult to store, and iconic, a perfect metaphor for the industry it represented. 44. The unicorn meat. Think Geek listed canned unicorn meat as an April Fool's joke, but the demand was real. Cans of unicorn meat, actually a dismembered plush toy inside, hit eBay. The description promised sparkles in every bite and an excellent source of magic. These gag gifts sold for premium prices. People bought a lie, knowing it was a lie because the packaging was funny. It proves that we don't buy products. We buy the smile solely for the moment we open the box. It is the consumption of irony. 45. The Popes Volkswagen. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger owned a humble 1999 VW Golf. Then he became Pope Benedict XVI. The car was suddenly a Pope-mobile by technicality. When the new owner listed it, they weren't selling a hatchback. They were selling a chariot of the Vicar of Christ. It sold for nearly $250,000. The car didn't drive better. It didn't get better gas mileage. But it had been sat in by a man with a direct line to God. The value was entirely spiritual, an invisible markup applied by the Catholic Church hierarchy. 46. The pregnant belly. Much like the forehead guy, a pregnant woman sold the space on her growing bump. A business paid to airbrush their logo onto her skin for the final months of her pregnancy. She became a walking billboard for the duration of gestation. She walked away with hundreds of dollars and a strange tan line. It speaks to the commodification of the female body in the most literal sense. Even the vessel of life is just another surface to slap a URL onto. 47. The Meaningless Box. The mystery box trend is the loot box of real life. People sell sealed boxes, contents unknown. One particular auction for a box of mystery with absolutely no description of contents sparked a frenzy. It appealed to the gambler's fallacy it could be anything, even a boat. It sold for hundreds, and usually contains junk, but the buyer is paying for the dopamine hit of the unboxing. The disappointment that follows is just the hangover. We are addicted to the potential of a purchase more than the purchase itself. 48. The Marilyn Monroe X-rays. A set of 3 chest X-rays of Marilyn Monroe from a 1954 hospital visit went up for auction. They are black and white medical films of a woman's ribs and lungs. There is no glamour here, only anatomy. Yet, because the bones belong to Marilyn, they are sacred. They sold for $45,000. It is a grim reminder that we consume women in Hollywood down to the marrow. The buyer owns the internal architecture of a sex symbol. It is intrusive, clinical, and expensive, a perfect summary of the star system. 49. The Big Mac Sauce. McDonald's released a limited edition bottle of Big Mac special sauce. One bottle hit eBay instantly. It is mayonnaise, relish, and ketchup mixed together. It is a condiment found on a $4 burger. It sold for over $90,000. The buyer paid a Porsche price for a bottle of dressing that expires in 6 months. It demonstrates the power of artificial scarcity. If you tell people they can't have the sauce, they will burn down their bank accounts to get the sauce. 50. The meaning of it all. The Internet. A user once listed the Internet for sale. The description promised full control of the web, all the memes, and the off switch. It was the ultimate troll. The bidding reached $1 million before the joke was killed. But in a way, it's the perfect end to this list. We are all bidding on the Internet every day with our attention. The fact that someone tried to buy the whole thing illustrates the delusion of the digital age. We think we can own the chaos, but the chaos owns us. The verdict. In the grand theater of human folly, these transactions are more than just receipts. They are a diagnosis. We are a species desperately searching for meaning in a material world, trying to buy magic, history, and connection, even if it comes in the form of a haunted jar or a moldy sandwich. We fill the void in our souls with buy it now clicks, hoping that the next package will be the one that finally makes us whole. It won't. But at least you didn't spend $30,000 on a piece of cheese. Or did you? Check your purchase history. The night is young, and the bidding is open.